This will change your mind about Avengers Doomsday. Now I know that sounds like a bold claim. And trust me, I'm not the type to just throw around empty hype or pretend that everything Marvel touches turns to gold. In fact, if you're anything like me, you've probably felt that weird mix of excitement and exhaustion when it comes to the MCU lately. On one hand, we grew up on these stories. We lived through the Infinity Saga. We cheered and cried at Endgame. On the other hand, well, let's be honest. The Marvel brand has been struggling to keep that same spark alive. And when people bring up Avengers Doomsday, the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of fans isn't hype. It's skepticism. It's almost like admitting you're excited for this movie feels like you're on some sort of copium, just clinging to the memory of when Marvel movies were events instead of obligations. But that's exactly why I wanted to make this video, because beneath all the memes, beneath the criticism, beneath the endless doom posting about superhero fatigue, I actually think there's a deeper story here. A story about what Marvel is really doing with Avengers Doomsday, and why, even if you've sworn off the MCU completely, you might want to at least keep one eye on this film. I know that's a tough sell, but hear me out, because the way people are talking about this movie right now doesn't tell the whole truth. And if you stay with me, I think I can flip your perspective. See, here's the thing about copium. It's not just about blindly hoping for something that's clearly going downhill. It's about how humans deal with disappointment. When something we love starts to let us down, we don't just walk away cold turkey. We bargain with ourselves. We look for signs of life, for reasons to keep caring. And with Marvel, that coping mechanism has practically become part of the fan experience. Every new trailer, every vague casting rumor, every tease of Kang or the Fantastic Four, people latch onto it as if the next thing will finally bring the magic back. Some people laugh at that, but I think it's actually fascinating, because it reveals just how much emotional investment we've all put into this universe. And Avengers Doomsday sits right at the center of that tension. It's not just another Marvel movie, it's being billed as the next Avengers-level event, the kind of movie that's supposed to unify the MCU again, the way the first Avengers did back in 2012. But here's where things get tricky. The hype machine is running, the speculation is out of control, but the actual faith in the movie's quality? That's not really there. And that gap, the gap between hype and faith, is exactly where this whole conversation gets interesting. Because if we strip away the noise, what we're left with is a pretty simple question. Do we still believe Marvel can pull this off? And if not, then what does Avengers Doomsday even represent anymore? Is it just a product to keep the brand alive, or could it be something more? Something that, against all odds, actually reshapes how we look at superhero stories again? When I started digging into this, I realized that Doomsday as a concept is bigger than just another team-up film. It's Marvel testing whether we're still emotionally tethered to these characters, whether we're willing to put our hearts back on the line after years of mixed results. And I think that's why people are so divided. Because on one level, we all know the Marvel formula. We know the jokes, the CGI armies, the third act skybeams. But on another level, there's this part of us that still wants to believe. We want that feeling back. And even if we mask it under layers of sarcasm and copium, the fact that we're still talking about it, still analyzing every little leak, still making videos like this one, that proves the fire isn't completely gone. Now, let me explain why Avengers Doomsday is different. And no, I don't just mean different in the marketing sense. I mean different in the way it reflects the very moment we're living in as fans. You see, the original Avengers film in 2012 wasn't just a crossover. It was proof of concept. It showed that Marvel could pull off the impossible, weaving individual characters into a shared universe that felt coherent, exciting, and emotionally satisfying. Endgame, years later, was the culmination of that experiment. It wasn't just a movie, it was the payoff to an entire era of storytelling. But after Endgame, the MCU didn't have a clear direction. Phase 4 felt scattered. Phase 5 has been shaky. And the cultural conversation shifted from Marvel can do no wrong to is Marvel done? That's where Doomsday enters, not as just another chapter, but as a test case for whether Marvel can reinvent itself. Can it take all the criticism, all the skepticism, all the baggage, and actually turn that into fuel for something that feels fresh? Or is Doomsday destined to be remembered as the movie that finally proved the MCU had run out of steam? And this is where the storytelling becomes fascinating. Because when you actually break down what Doomsday represents, it's less about Kang, or multiverses, or cameos, and more about the psychology of fandom itself. Think about it. Hype without faith is basically hollow. Faith without hype is irrelevant. But when those two align, that's when you get something unforgettable. And right now, Marvel is trying to bridge that gap with Avengers Doomsday. So Arc 1 of this story is all about recognizing that tension. Let's dive into what I mean. When you hear people online talk about Avengers Doomsday, there's almost a defensive tone. Like, yeah, I'll probably watch it, but only because I've watched all the others. Or, I'm not falling for Marvel's tricks again, but hey, maybe this one will surprise me. That's the copium at play. It's this paradox of pretending not to care while secretly hoping to care again. And I think Marvel knows this. In fact, I think the marketing strategy is built on it. Consider the way Marvel has been positioning its announcements lately. They're leaning heavily on nostalgia, on familiar faces, on the promise of event-level storytelling. But here's the genius, or maybe the desperation of it. They're not asking us to trust them blindly anymore. They're daring us to doubt. They're leaning into the narrative that Marvel has fallen off, because that sets up the comeback story. And Avengers Doomsday, by its very name, taps into that idea of finality. It's like Marvel is saying, fine, if you think we're done, let's make a movie where everything ends. And let's see if you can resist watching. That's why I don't think Doomsday is just another Avengers movie. It's a cultural litmus test. Are we still invested enough to give Marvel one more shot? And if we are, what does that say about us? Here's where the theory side comes in. I think Doomsday isn't going to just be about multiverse shenanigans. I think it's going to be Marvel's most self-aware movie yet, whether they intend it or not. The title alone suggests a reckoning, an ending, a collapse of everything we know about the MCU. And if Marvel is smart, they'll use that to comment on their own state of decline. Imagine a story where the Avengers aren't just fighting Kang. They're fighting to prove they still matter in a world that's moved on. That kind of meta layer could turn the movie into something way deeper than anyone expects. But here's the kicker. Even if Marvel doesn't consciously lean into that, we as fans are already going to project those meanings onto it, because the timing, the context, and the skepticism make it impossible not to. We'll watch every frame of Doomsday, not just as entertainment, but as a referendum on whether the MCU still deserves our time. And that's why this movie has so much riding on it. So if you're feeling cynical, I get it. I felt that way too. But part of me can't shake the idea that Avengers Doomsday is the perfect storm. The right movie at the right time to either redeem Marvel or bury it. And honestly, that makes me more curious than anything Marvel has done in years. And maybe that's the real twist. Maybe the copium isn't about blindly hoping Marvel will fix everything. Maybe it's about admitting that deep down, we want to be proven wrong. We want Doomsday to surprise us, to shut up the haters, to remind us why we cared in the first place. And if Marvel can pull that off, even just once more, then the MCU story isn't over. It's just entering its most self-aware chapter yet. So let's push this further. If Arc 1 was about laying out the tension between hype and faith, then Arc 2 is about exploring what happens when we really dig into the possibilities of Avengers Doomsday itself. Because it's one thing to talk about the psychology of fandom, but it's another to actually unpack what Marvel might be building, how it ties into everything we've seen so far, and why, despite all the skepticism, this could end up being the most important Marvel film since Endgame. And I want to start here. The word Doomsday itself. That's not an accident. Marvel could have gone with any kind of subtitle. They could have leaned into Secret Wars, or Kang Dynasty Part 2, or even something as vague as Avengers Reborn. But they chose Doomsday. That word carries weight. It's not just an ending, it's judgment, it's reckoning, it's the collapse of systems we thought were unshakable. And if you look at the state of Marvel right now, doesn't that feel a little too perfect? It's almost as if the studio itself is acknowledging where they are. This isn't a victory lap. This isn't an easy crowd pleaser. This is Marvel essentially saying, yeah, everything is falling apart. But that's the point. And here's where the speculation gets fun. Because Doomsday could mean multiple things at once. On the surface, sure, it probably refers to the Avengers facing their greatest threat, the collapse of the multiverse, Kang's ultimate plan, universes colliding, maybe even Doctor Doom entering the picture as a shadowy puppet master. But on a deeper level, I think it's Marvel using the narrative to mirror our own disillusionment. Imagine watching the Avengers themselves struggle with irrelevance, exhaustion, and failure, the same way fans feel about the franchise. Suddenly, it's not just another fight. It's a metaphor for whether the MCU still deserves a place in our cultural imagination. Now let's bring in the elephant in the room, Kang. The MCU has put so much weight on Jonathan Majors' portrayal of Kang, and with all the behind-the-scenes controversies, fans have lost confidence in the character's role as the big bad. But here's the twist. What if that works to Doomsday's advantage? Because Kang isn't just another villain like Thanos. Thanos was simple. He had one plan, one ideology, one inevitable snap. Kang is fractured. Kang is infinite. Kang is chaos itself. And isn't that exactly how the MCU feels right now? Too many characters, too many projects, too much noise, and no clear direction. That's why I think Kang, or at least the concept of Kang, could become the most meta-villain Marvel has ever created. He doesn't just represent a physical threat, he represents the collapse of storytelling cohesion itself. He is the embodiment of Marvel's post-Endgame identity crisis. And if Doomsday leans into that, suddenly the movie becomes more than just another crossover. It becomes a reflection of everything fans have been saying about the franchise for years. But here's where it gets wild. What if Doomsday isn't really about Kang at all? What if Kang is just the bait, the setup, the smokescreen? Because think about it. Marvel knows that fan excitement for Kang has cooled. They know the faith isn't there. But if they used Kang as a red herring to build toward the reveal of a bigger villain, someone like Doctor Doom, or even the Beyonder in a Secret War-style twist, then suddenly, Doomsday becomes the movie that reclaims that sense of shock and awe we've been missing. And that brings me to another point. Cameos. Look, I know people roll their eyes at Marvel relying on cameos as cheap tricks. And yes, it's become a meme at this point. But if Doomsday really is the Avengers movie to end all Avengers movies, then the cameos aren't just gimmicks, they're essential. Because this isn't just about telling one story, it's about collapsing the entire multiverse. And that means, for better or worse, Marvel has the excuse to bring in everyone. The old guard, the Fox X-Men, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, maybe even alternate versions of characters we thought were gone forever. And here's where the copium kicks in, right? Because part of me knows that sounds like fan service overload. It sounds like Marvel trying to distract us with shiny objects instead of fixing the real problems. But another part of me can't help but get excited at the thought of seeing all these worlds collide. Because when you strip it down, isn't that the promise of the MCU from the beginning? The idea that these characters don't just exist in isolation, they exist together, in a web of connections that make every story feel bigger? If Doomsday can deliver on that idea, even if it's messy, then it might just reignite the spark that made us fall in love with Marvel in the first place. But let's not sugarcoat it. There's a huge risk here, because hype is a double-edged sword. If Doomsday builds itself up as the ultimate multiverse event and fails to deliver, it won't just be another disappointment. It'll be the nail in the coffin. Fans won't just be skeptical, they'll be done. That's why I think Marvel has to approach this differently. They can't just throw everything at the screen and hope we clap. They need to anchor it in emotion. They need to give us a reason to care about these characters again. And that's where I think Doomsday could actually shine. Because the Avengers we knew, the original 6, they're gone, or they've moved on. What we have now are legacies, new heroes stepping into old mantles, fractured teams trying to figure out their place. And that story, of a new generation struggling to live up to legends, parallels the exact situation Marvel Studios is in right now. Just like the Avengers, Marvel itself is living in the shadow of its glory days. And if the film can lean into that, if it can make the characters' struggle mirror the franchise's struggle, then suddenly you have a story that feels real again. Not just spectacle, not just fan service, but something that resonates. Take someone like Sam Wilson's Captain America. He's stepping into Steve Rogers' shoes, a role that carries immense weight. Fans are divided on whether he can live up to it. Doesn't that sound exactly like Marvel post-Endgame? Living up to impossible expectations? Or look at characters like Shang-Chi, or Ms. Marvel, or the young Avengers we know are coming. They're all symbols of a franchise trying to reinvent itself while carrying the baggage of what came before. Doomsday, as a narrative, could tie all of that together in a way that finally feels purposeful. Yes, now let's zoom out. One of the biggest criticisms of the MCU lately is that it's become homework. Too many shows, too many projects, too much you need to watch just to understand the story. And honestly, I agree. But Doomsday could be the reset button. Because if everything collapses, if the multiverse implodes, if timelines converge, if entire universes are wiped out, then Marvel suddenly has the opportunity to streamline everything. One timeline, one universe, one continuity. Imagine watching Doomsday, knowing that everything you've seen before, all the scattered plots and inconsistencies, are leading to a massive convergence that cleans the slate. That's not just spectacle. That's strategy. And that brings me back to why I think this isn't just copium. Because if Marvel is really smart, they'll use Doomsday not just as a finale, but as a pivot. A way to acknowledge the flaws of the last few years while setting up a new era with clarity. And if they pull that off, then Doomsday could end up being remembered not as the end of Marvel, but as the rebirth. But here's where I want to challenge you. Ask yourself, when you think about Avengers Doomsday, are you imagining another generic Marvel blockbuster? Or are you secretly hoping for something more? Because I think deep down, that's what we all want. We want Marvel to surprise us again. We want them to make us feel the way we did the first time we saw the Avengers assemble, or when we heard Cap say, Avengers, assemble. That's not just nostalgia. That's the emotional benchmark we hold Marvel to. And if Doomsday can even come close to that, then it won't just be another movie. It'll be the moment that proves Marvel still has some fight left. And I'll be honest, I go back and forth on this. Some days, I think it's impossible. The fatigue is too real, the formula too worn out. But other days, when I really think about the potential, I can't help but feel that flicker of excitement. Because let's not forget, Marvel has been counted out before. People doubted the first Avengers. People doubted Guardians of the Galaxy. People doubted that Endgame could live up to Infinity War. And yet, time and time again, Marvel found a way to deliver. Not always perfectly, not always flawlessly, but enough to remind us why we cared. So, maybe believing in Doomsday isn't just copium. Maybe it's about recognizing that even in disappointment, there's still room for hope. Because hope is what these stories are built on. The Avengers aren't about winning easily. They're about standing up when everything seems lost. And right now, that's exactly what Marvel needs to do. And that's why Arc 2 is about embracing the paradox. We can be skeptical, we can be critical, but we can also be hopeful. And Avengers Doomsday, for all its risks, might just be the movie that forces Marvel to rise to the occasion or collapse completely. Either way, it's going to be unforgettable. If Arc 1 was about setting up the tension between hype and faith, and Arc 2 was about exploring the possibilities of what Avengers Doomsday could really mean for Marvel, then Arc 3 is where we tie it all together. This is where we step back and ask, what does it all add up to? What does this movie truly represent? Not just for the MCU, but for us as fans, as people who've grown up with these stories, who've invested not just money or time, but actual emotion into this franchise. Because whether we want to admit it or not, this isn't just about superheroes on a screen. It's about how we cope with endings, with disappointment, with the possibility that something we love might never feel the same again. And that's exactly what makes Doomsday such a fascinating idea. Here's the thing about endings. They scare us. We avoid them. We fight them. We convince ourselves there's always going to be another story. But the truth is, endings are what give stories their weight. Endings force us to reckon with everything that came before. And if you look at Marvel right now, the truth is, It's been drifting without a real ending since Endgame. That was the conclusion we thought we'd never see, a proper goodbye to a saga. But instead of ending clean, Marvel kept going. They kept expanding, stretching, spinning, trying to recapture lightning in a bottle. And for a while, it worked. But eventually, the cracks started to show. And that's why Doomsday feels like such a pivotal moment. Because for the first time since Endgame, Marvel is openly acknowledging the idea of finality again. By even using that word, by even daring to market an Avengers movie with the shadow of "this could be the end," they're tapping into something primal. The idea that this might actually be the last time we see the Avengers as we know them. And whether that's true or not, doesn't even matter. The feeling of it, the weight of it, is what's going to pull people back in. Now let's get into the theory side. One possibility that I can't stop thinking about is that Doomsday won't just be an ending in the narrative. It'll be an ending in the meta sense too. I don't mean the MCU is going to stop, but I do think Doomsday could mark the death of one version of Marvel and the birth of another. Almost like a line drawn in the sand. Everything before Doomsday will feel like the first saga of the MCU, messy as it's become. Everything after will feel like the reboot, the streamlined universe that fans have been asking for. And if Marvel is clever, they'll use Doomsday to make that transition emotional instead of corporate. They'll make it feel like a story choice instead of a business choice. Imagine it. Heroes dying, not just for the sake of spectacle, but to symbolize the passing of the torch. Worlds collapsing not just for CGI fireworks, but to represent the end of an era. New heroes rising not just because Marvel needs fresh IP, but because the story itself demands it. That's the difference between another formulaic blockbuster and something that actually resonates. That's the difference between hype and faith. And here's another layer. I think Doomsday has the potential to explore loss in a way Marvel hasn't done since Tony Stark's death. Think about it. Endgame was the last time we really felt the weight of sacrifice. Since then, Marvel stories have flirted with big stakes, but they've never quite landed the same way. Doomsday could be the chance to bring that back, because when you call your movie Doomsday, you're promising the audience that not everyone's making it out alive. And as much as that hurts, as much as it scares us, isn't that exactly what we need to feel again? That sense that these stories matter, that actions have consequences, that heroes can fall. And it's not just about shock value. It's about catharsis. Because here's the truth. As fans, we've already been grieving Marvel in a way. We've been grieving the loss of the magic, the loss of the excitement, the loss of what the MCU used to mean. We joke about copium, but beneath that joke is sadness. Sadness that something we cared about feels hollow now. And if Doomsday can tap into that, if it can make that grief part of the story, then suddenly the movie isn't just entertainment, it's therapy. It's Marvel acknowledging our disappointment and giving us a way to process it through the story itself. Let's speculate for a second. Picture an Avengers lineup that isn't the perfect polished team we remember, but a fractured group of heroes who are tired, uncertain, maybe even disillusioned. Imagine Sam Wilson questioning whether he can truly live up to Captain America. Imagine Doctor Strange wrestling with the weight of his multiverse meddling. Imagine Spider-Man, our one remaining link to the old guard, fighting not just for the world, but for the idea that heroes still matter. That's not just spectacle. That's human. That's relatable. Because in a way, we're all in that position right now, wondering if we can still care, wondering if we can still believe. And then imagine the sacrifice. Imagine the movie daring to let beloved characters fall, not for shock value, but to give the new generation a reason to rise. Imagine the multiverse collapsing, but out of that collapse comes a new order. A reset that strips away the noise and focuses on what really matters. If Marvel pulls that off, then Doomsday won't just be a movie. It'll be a statement. A moment in pop culture history where a franchise on the verge of collapse managed to turn its own decline into the most powerful story it's ever told. But I know what you're thinking. Isn't that just more copium? Isn't that just me trying to spin hope out of a situation that's probably doomed? And maybe it is. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe I'm doing the exact thing I criticized earlier. Clinging to scraps, looking for signs of life, bargaining with myself that Marvel can still surprise me. But here's the twist. Even if it is copium, does that make it worthless? Because to me, copium is just another word for hope dressed up in sarcasm. It's admitting we still care, even if it's not cool to admit it. And honestly, I'd rather be hopeful than cynical. I'd rather believe there's still a chance for Marvel to give us something unforgettable than write it off completely. And maybe that's what Avengers, Doomsday, is really about. Not just endings, not just collapses, but the idea that even in the darkest moment, even when everything feels lost, there's still a chance for something new to rise. That's what the Avengers have always stood for. That's what heroes represent. And that's why, no matter how skeptical I get, no matter how much I roll my eyes at Marvel's missteps, I know I'll be there on opening night. Because deep down, I still want to believe. So here's my final thought. Avengers, Doomsday might not be perfect. It might not fix every problem the MCU has, but it doesn't need to. What it needs to do is remind us why we cared in the first place. It needs to give us a reason to feel again, to laugh, to cry, to cheer, to mourn. To believe that stories still matter, even when the magic feels gone. And if it can do that, even for a few hours, then it'll be worth it. And maybe, just maybe, it won't just change the MCU, maybe it'll change us too. Because these stories have always been mirrors. Mirrors for our hopes, our fears, our struggles. And right now, in a world that feels more fractured, more uncertain than ever, maybe what we need isn't just another superhero movie. Maybe what we need is Doomsday. That's why, for me, this isn't just copium. This is faith. Faith that endings can be beginnings. Faith that even franchises can redeem themselves. Faith that somewhere inside Marvel Studios, there are still storytellers who understand why we care. And until Doomsday proves me wrong, I'm holding on to that faith. And if you've made it this far with me, I think maybe you feel the same. Maybe part of you still wants to believe too. And that's why I wanted to share this. Because sometimes it's not about being right or wrong. It's about daring to hope. So, if this breakdown gave you something to think about, if it sparked that flicker of excitement, or even just made you reconsider your own feelings about Marvel and Avengers, Doomsday, then do me a favor. Hit that like button, because it really does help more people see this. Drop a comment and tell me where you stand. Are you hopeful, skeptical, or somewhere in between? And of course, subscribe if you want more deep dive breakdowns like this, because trust me, I've got plenty more theories where this came from. At the end of the day, whether Doomsday ends up being Marvel's salvation or its swan song, it's going to be one of the most fascinating pop culture events of our time. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't miss that for the world.